Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Are you or your team performing all possible vendor validations? Do you know which documents have the key data you need to confirm that the vendor you are about to create or update is real? Be sure by downloading the vendor validation reference list. It also has links to all the resources listed. Download at www.deborah, D-E-B-R-A, R. Richardson, RICHARDSON.com. Wondering what machine learning can do for accounts payable? Well, my guest today, Mikko Hytönen, CEO of Dooap, is here to share with you how you may already be using it, and if not, how you can start. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 90, Machine Learning in Accounts Payable. Today, I have Mikko Hytönen to discuss machine learning. And Mikko is the CEO at Dooap. And Mikko, I want you to share your background and what's unique about Dooap or Dooap, especially where the name came from and the deal with the cute pooch that's watching over the lambs on the homepage of your website. He's also in emails. I've seen him there. So kind of tell us what's up with the pooch as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Deborah. Great to be here, and hello, everybody. Maybe I just start with a little bit of a background of myself. So I got a history of 20 years in software business, different roles, business roles, finance roles. I've been a CFO myself as well, so I guess I have a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about AP automation. And I guess outside work, I'm really interested in cooking and also a fan of sports. So I guess those go nicely together because when you eat, you gotta take care of the exercising as well.
Yep.
But going back to Dooap, I guess in terms of the name, we kind of obviously wanted to combine AP, accounts payable, into something that is very concrete and something to do with the tasks that we're facing day to day, and that is probably when we came up with the Do, and that is why we ended up with Dooap. And there were actually quite a lot of other options as well. I'm not going to mention those because some of them weren't that good. But anyway, when it really comes to the pooch, I think the breed there is Border Collie, and I think we all kind of associate it with the intelligence, and it's kind of one of the most intelligent working dogs in the world. And I think when we have the sheep included there, we tend to think that those are actually the invoices that the Dooap dog takes care of, because sometimes they are out of control, and we actually want to see that everybody's in line. So maybe that's a bit of a background to the dog and the name Dooap.
Wow. Okay. So he's watching over the sheep in that pic on your website. It's and actually it does have that meaning of watching over your processes, your invoicing. So that's a very powerful image. And I do love the pooch, and I have seen him in emails before as well. So it's just something different, and it's great branding. So do AP, and that's actually spelled OOAP or Dooap. Do you get a lot of people calling it Dooap? Because I think I've done that twice, and we've only been on the podcast like 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, we see it every now and then, but I think generally it's Dooap. And but for example, when
Okay.
we go into industry events, we kind of hear people trying to figure out is it Dooap or Dooap. But I guess we're fine either way.
All right, so let's jump right in with machine learning. And I've done a couple of podcasts on robotics process automation or RPA, where you build rules for software bots to follow, which does help accounts payable with those tasks that are rule based. But, I think it's time now that we need to move on to more digital solutions that can go beyond rule-based tasks. And I know at Dooap, you've done some recent talks on machine learning. So if you can help us understand what is machine learning and where does it fit with artificial intelligence, and how are both different from RPA?
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe kind of go a bit back to the definition. So I think if we look at a machine learning overall, I'd say that's kind of a subset of artificial intelligence in general, because I think that's very far-reaching concept. So you can include machine learning there, partially also RPA, although as you were mentioning, it's kind of rule based. So as such, there isn't that much of an artificial intelligence building into it. But anyway, I think these areas are kind of overlapping. And I guess if you kind of want to go deeper in terms of machine learning, then you actually get into deep learning, which is maybe even more intelligent subset of AI and machine learning. But I'd say that RPA really, that is something that I'd say it's kind of a traditional way of working, that you have a target, you have a specification against which you're working for, you define the rules, and you have, let's say, very easily defined, or well, not necessarily easily, but at least use case that you can define, and then based on that you will be building the rules, and it will solve your business problem. But I'd really say that the fundamental difference is that RPA is really rule based, maybe more structurally tied into how you define it, and then machine learning, as the name suggests, it's really something that can adapt to the needs and actually learns as we go.
So on that note, then, with RPA and the machine learning, I know when I was an AP manager, we had a tool out there that we could bring into our own team, and I even had the luxury of being able to identify somewhere to use one of the tools. And there are tools out there like Automation Anywhere and UiPath that put that power to automate in AP teams' hands. Is that the same with machine learning? Is that a tool that can be used by like skilled AP team members with training the same way it is with RPA tools? Or is that something that's more for the automation tools that AP would purchase? So is that more for like software for e-invoicing or invoice automation, or is it something that you can put that in the hands of a skilled APT member, and then they can kind of go forward the same way that they do with RPA?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that there's a bit of a difference there, because I think machine learning overall, when you're kind of building the model and teaching the algorithms, it's a bit of a trial and error, and probably requires quite deep understanding on how the models work and what you actually want to achieve. And it's kind of really never something that you can just get off the shelf, but it's really by means of experimenting how you're getting the end results. So I'd say it's really a bit different from RPA. Of course, as you were saying, if you have really skilled AP team members, I guess nothing is really stopping you in implementing machine learning tools as well. But I'd say that it's way more complex in nature compared to actually maybe some of the RPA tools out there. And kind of looking into the AP automation solutions, then I think because of the complexity, that is typically something that you would have embedded into the AP automation tools, that actually someone else has kind of figured out the math, and actually then the people using the software don't really need to worry about it, but it's kind of already in there and working.
So we've heard out there that accounts payable teams are really starting to look at that based on the recent pain points as a result of working from home during the pandemic. And so with these accounts payable automation tools that are out there that have been around for years, now they're starting to incorporate machine learning, as you just talked about. So what really makes the automation, those AP automation tools different now that we're starting to see that machine learning is included in those tools?
Yeah, I think it's really, in a way, the simple answer is that is the level of automation, because I guess theoretically, if you look at AI and machine learning, that should get us close to 100% level of automation. Obviously, we're not quite there yet, and I don't know if there's anybody out there who's totally relying on the machines. But I think kind of the starting point, how we look at this, especially in the unfortunate times that we've been going through, is that kind of the starting point for any automation is that you're getting rid of the paper and actually get everything in a digital format. And of course, you can use a third-party provider for that, or you can do it yourself. But once you actually capture all the data that you have available on the invoice or other document, that is kind of the starting point then for the automation. And I guess then the difference in a way between RPA and machine learning comes into play, because if you think about RPA, it's kind of rule based, but machine learning kind of has all the historical data in the background. So whatever you've done with that invoice in the past is available for figuring out what should I do today for this invoice. And I think it's very similar to the human thinking, because you remember that, okay, 2 months ago I had this kind of invoice, I probably did this and that was the right thing to do. It may be that you don't actually remember that on the spot, but anyway, that's the thinking process. But the good thing with the machine is really that you can easily in like nanoseconds go back to the history a couple of years and maybe millions of transactions and figure out how should we actually deal with this kind of transaction, and what have we done before with this kind of invoice. And maybe just a simple example there is that if you think about purchase order based invoices, and typically you have some miscellaneous costs there, it could be freight, it could be something else, and obviously that's a mismatch then, because the PO value doesn't tie exactly to the invoice. But then with the machine learning capabilities, it's pretty easy to spot that anomaly in a way and say that, okay, hey, it seems like we've had this freight cost repeating here every month or week in the past. So it's probably okay to assume that this is actually that kind of cost. And when you think about the data on the invoice, actually the OCR capabilities, what we're having in the system, they are actually able to catch that kind of notion to the freight. So you know that it says here freight and it's $50, so that's what it's got to be. And what that means then is that nobody actually needs to touch that invoice anymore, because it's already taken care of by the system.
So where years ago, before, machine learning came into these AP automation tools, that probably would have been an exception that a human would have had to look at because it would not have been a match.
Exactly, and I think that's the whole point of
Yeah.
the machine learning, that we also just kind of want to bring the real exceptions to the hands of the
Mm-hmm.
AP folks. So something that is repeating and straightforward, you don't necessarily want to deal with that.
Yeah, and what about the one of the biggest pain points, whether you're working remotely or working in the office, and it's that coding, GL coding of the invoice. Machine learning can help in that instance as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think traditionally the coding also has been a bit more rule based. That let's say you have a particular vendor, uh, you would code the invoice in the same manner every time. But then again, you may have multiple accounting lines and some
Hmm.
other exceptions. But then again, going back to that, machine learning helps a great deal there, because it will kind of take care of the rule-based coding you had in the past. And also when you have a lot of different data in the background, obviously based on the invoice content, the machine can already interpret that, okay, it looks like this is office stationery that these folks are buying, so I think I should be accounting that accordingly. And then maybe just have a little flag in the AP system saying that this was actually coded by Einstein or whoever. So if the AP team wants to check the things that have been completed by the machine, that is always possible.
That's very interesting, and it really streamlines the AP process, makes that more efficient because you have less exceptions that a human has to touch. And speaking of touch, I think one of the unique aspects of Dooap is that you guys have a mobile app, correct?
Yes, that is true.
One of your taglines is even just swipe invoices off your to-do list. I think that's great.
Yeah, and it's literally like that, because when you use our app, you actually get the invoice there, and if you want to drill down into the details, you can always do that and see the invoice picture even, and change the accounting entries. But I think the bottom line there is that you just actually swipe right if you want to approve the invoice, and that's it. That's all you need to do. And then if it's something that you don't want to process right now, you just swipe left, and then it's on your to-do list, or then you can send it back to AP. But I think where we're aiming at is that whenever it hits your mobile app, everything's
Mhm.
taken care of, and you just approve with a kind of single motion of your finger, and that's it. And I think that will actually make everybody's life a lot easier, especially when you're working outside of the AP or finance organization, because I think sometimes we tend to forget that there are actually a lot of people involved in the AP process, and if it's not working perfectly, then we're consuming everybody's time.
I know on the vendor side, when we talk about AP automation and vendor portals, I always talk about vendor adoption. But there's a whole nother side of that that's definitely present with invoice automation as well. And that's the employee or internal team member adoption. And I think anything that makes that process easier, like the mobile, being able to approve it on your mobile phone, so that people can approve it when they're in the office, not in the office. And then as we all get back to traveling, it makes it convenient. And so it just increases the adoption, because adoption can be an issue with internals and also with vendors. And so often the internals are sometimes left out. And so giving them the option for the mobile, I think, is a great way to increase adoption internally.
Yeah, and I think like let's say looking at managers, C-level
Mhm.
person, like we've received some feedback from our clients and particularly their CFOs that it's actually great with this app, because there's also
Mhm.
the kind of if you look at the process, there needs to be a control point, and
Yeah.
typically kind of enforcing controls is also a lot more easier and meaningful when the approval process is simple. So when everything is okay and you need to approve your invoices or payments, you just actually go into mobile app and do it.
Let's talk about the security with that mobile app. I'm assuming security precautions taken with that as well, with that
Yes, of
feature.
course.
So, talking about security, you recently published an article on msdynamicsworld.com, and you identified some ways to reduce fraud in AP. And that's kind of where I live, especially within the vendor onboarding and vendor updating process. So, can you share with the audience some tips, and are any of them related to the use of machine learning?
Yes, they are, and I think the overall thinking what we're having in the product obviously is that there needs to be built-in controls and relevant control points for whatever you're actually doing in the system, and kind of limiting the human interaction to the steps where it's necessary. And I think as part of that, as I was saying earlier, it's really important that we get everything digital from the very beginning of the process, because then you can use all that data. And of course, kind of from the fraud prevention uh, perspective, delegation of authority, all the rules that you have in the company, they need to be built into the system. But then I think where machine learning comes into play is really, again, going back to the data, because you can easily scan through the history that, okay, there's an invoice from this vendor, maybe the bank account details, address details, invoice details, they've been like that in the past. So are they the same currently? And of course, verifying duplicate invoices, vendor data, that's all where machine learning really comes into play. And I think maybe thinking AP automation a bit along the lines of credit cards, because I think we all know that when we have a bit different shopping pattern than we've had in the past, we typically get a notification from our credit card company that, hey, something is not right, or at least a question that, did you actually buy this thing? So I think it's very similar to AP. So when we use the capabilities of machine learning, then we can really spot the anomalies from the data and actually prevent anything from happening, and not end up in a situation when it's actually too late.
Okay, so by using machine learning, then you can see when an invoice is that typical static data, their email address, their banking details, their remit address. You can tell when that changes.
Yeah,
Wow, and then alert the accounts payable team so that they can research that more to verify whether that's a valid invoice or whether it's a fraudulent invoice. And if valid, I mean, that's still a great way to identify changes that the vendor hasn't told you about. So it's still a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, then you can ask the question that,
Yeah.
hey, did he actually make these changes or not? And I think the point is just that what we want to do is that, okay, of course, we kind of, if we look at the traditional manual process, you would verify the content. Of course, sometimes you're really busy and you may not do that.
Mhm.
But actually, when you're applying modern AP automation powered by the machine learning, then kind of all the anomalies are flagged to you, so you don't actually need to worry about, let's
Yeah.
say, the standard items. But when there's something that is not right, you can focus on that.
Yeah, and again, I think that's really good because not a lot, but I have had a few people reach out to me in the past and talk about or ask, because they say that they've been tasked with identifying, when their vendor information changes on an invoice, yet, they have and probably maybe a system that doesn't have machine learning in it, and so there's no way for them to tell if there's a change on the invoice, yet they're responsible for noticing when there's information on the invoice that has changed. So it sounds like machine learning solves that problem.
Yeah, it would, and I think there are plenty of other use cases, but I
Right.
think maybe kind of the simplest one are also the most powerful.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that Dooap has a podcast, new podcast called AP Automazing, and I love that name, by the way. What do you talk about on your podcast episodes?
Yeah, I think it's the typical things that we would think our customers and prospects are thinking. So I think
Yeah.
where we got started was really how to get going with AP automation. We've been going through some of the machine learning topics. A bit explaining the implementation project of AP automation, because sometimes we still see that people are thinking it as very complex and complicated project, which it really isn't, because you can implement modern AP automation solution in a matter of days. And then kind of other topics that like e-invoicing, and I'd say it's a bit of a combination of how to get
Mhm.
started, what is happening currently, and how the future looks like.
If I heard you correct, you said you have an episode out there on what the implementation process is like, and then also an episode where you kind of go a little bit deeper into machine learning.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so with that, why don't you tell the audience where they can go to listen to that podcast? I think it's on your site, correct? And is it on like all the normal podcast platforms?
Yeah, it is on our side and all the normal podcast platforms like Spotify, Buzzsprout, and so forth. So that is where you can find our podcasts.
All right, so I'll put a link to the podcast on your page. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And so, where can the audience go if they want more information on you or want more information on Dooap and the Pooch?
Yeah, so I think the best way to reach out is really go to dooap.com. Of
Mhm.
course, we're presenting in all the social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, uh, Twitter. But I think really the easiest way is probably to go onto our website. All our team members' contact details are in there, so you can find our phone numbers and so forth. And of course, if there are any questions to me, I'm always available and happy to answer those.
Yeah, and I see you have chatbot here on your website. And of course, it says having a rough time, RUFF, having a rough time with invoices. How can I help? So I guess the site is a great place, a great resource to go. So I'll put that in the show notes as well as links to your other social media accounts.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you, Mikko. I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about accounts payable and machine learning and what it can do for the accounts payable process. And maybe we'll have you on again sometime in the future.
Thanks a lot, Deborah. It's been my pleasure and happy to join you in the future.
So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 90th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.